Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here today and for your coverage throughout the session and really throughout the pandemic. I don't have in my talking points any pandemic-related reports, but they're available on the LDH website. I want to start by thanking Speaker Clay Sexsnyder and President Paige Cortez, and really all the members of the legislature for working with me to navigate another legislative session in the midst of a pandemic. I will tell you, I believe we've come a long way in many ways since April the 12th. Since that day, we've opened up COVID vaccine eligibility to everyone 12 and older. Cases and hospitalizations have decreased, and that has allowed for restrictions to be lifted. And those of us, like myself, who vaccinated, we've been able to gather and take off our masks. And I'm proud to see that all of you have done the same. The May REC forecast reflected continued and robust recovery in terms of our economy. And there is no doubt that Louisiana is in a much different and a much better place today than we were just a couple of months ago when this session started. And I believe that because of the budget and many of the other bills that were passed in this session, we're setting the stage for more success in the coming months and years. And I want to start by highlighting the budget, which, as you know, I've already signed. I think I've signed all the appropriations bills. The budget for the state of Louisiana for the coming fiscal year is a far cry from those of years past, when our feet were dangling off the edge of a fiscal cliff. Because of the stability that we created through previous reforms and an increase in the revenue forecast that happened in May, as I mentioned a while ago, and also because of additional federal funding to support the state's recovery from the pandemic, we've been able to make critical investments that will improve life for many Louisianans, and we've achieved a great deal of stability. As you all know, my number one priority was investing in education, and we have been able to do that in a very significant way. Teachers will receive an $800 pay raise. School support workers will receive a $400 raise. It's more than we originally planned, and that's thanks to that improved May forecast, which was obviously much higher than the January forecast upon which the executive budget had been based. But I still know that it isn't enough. Our teachers are not yet at the Southern Regional average. That is my commitment. That's our goal. But these raises are one more step towards that goal. And I have every expectation that we will take another step next year. And it's important every year, and has been for a long time. But I want you to think about what our teachers and support workers and everyone who works on these campuses educating our children have been through over the past 15 or 16 months. They were able to learn how to teach remotely, distance learning. They provided, in terms of the support workers, much needed meals to children during the pandemic at risk to themselves. They were there working to prepare and to serve meals. Even when the kids weren't in school, they could go to the schools and get meals. They made sure that the learning environment would be safe when we resumed in-person education, which we did in Louisiana to a much higher degree than the vast majority of other states across the country, to make sure that the disruption to children's education would be as small as possible. So I will tell you, in my mind at least, these teachers and support workers are more than deserving of a pay increase, and they are more than deserving of being at the Southern Regional average at a minimum. While a major state increase in state general fund to early childhood education was not included in the budget, and I think that that's regrettable, there is a dedicated portion of tax revenue from the sports betting that will provide funding. And that funding should kick in relatively soon. It'll go to the local incentive program, which is exactly where the Superintendent of Education, Brumley, had asked that it go. And I believe in a conference committee report, that amount was actually increased to as much as $20 million a year, depending on how much revenue is produced. In terms of higher education, I will simply say at the outset, it's the best budget in at least 15 years. The budget supports a $19.8 million faculty pay raise, an additional $14.5 million in higher education funding formula for both our 4-year and 2-year institutions. TOPS is fully funded, and there's been a little more than $11 million in additional investment in GO grants, which, as you know, is our need-based aid for higher education. And with that investment, need-based aid will reach $40 million a year. That is 4 times what it was when I became governor. Every Louisianan deserves access to a world-class learning environment. From the time they learn the ABCs in an early age to the time they get their doctorate degree, or whatever they do in between with a degree or credential. Because we all know that the key to increased opportunity, the key to increased prosperity, both for individuals and families, but collectively for the state of Louisiana, is education. The budget also includes support for families on Medicaid and those living with disabilities. It offers additional support for foster families and adoptive parents working with the Department of Children and Family Services. It provides for access to important services for our senior citizens. And it does make strategic investments in infrastructure, economic development, public safety, and the justice system. It's a budget that we can build a better future on. And I'm glad that I signed it. I want to thank the legislature for not giving in to the temptation that we've seen in the past to use one-time money on recurring expenses. By the way, we have just about completely eliminated that practice since I've been governor from the very first year. I'm grateful for the coronavirus relief funding that we have received from the federal government. And I want to thank our congressional delegation, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and all of Congress. It is critical to our recovery. But it's important that we don't set ourselves up for another fiscal cliff like the one that I inherited. And so I refuse to let that happen. We're not going to make hasty long-term changes to state general fund based upon short-term revenue increases because we know that at some point the stimulative effect of all of the federal dollars circulating in our economy will go away. And we're going to reset, and we're going to have a new baseline. And we don't know today what that's going to be. And so we have to make sure that we don't create the fiscal cliff that we are just now recovering from. It's also why, by the way, we wanted the tax reform, which I'm thankful, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, to be revenue neutral. We started the session with an ambitious legislative package of 13 bills. The common thread, every single bill worked toward creating creating a thriving Louisiana, where everyone has fair access to opportunities for success. They aim to ensure equal treatment under the law and advocate for those who need support, including those living with disabilities, victims of human trafficking, those in foster care, and all people who've been denied basic fairness and opportunity because of their gender. And while not every bill reached final passage, I look forward to signing 10 of the 13 bills into law. House Bill 379 by Ed Laverdane authorizes exemplary damages for victims of sexual assault in the workplace. House Bill 409 by Amy Freeman strengthens and clarifies the Title IX reporting and procedures on higher education campuses. This is one of several Title IX related bills that I'm eager to sign. The Select Committee on Women, by the way, in the Senate did an amazing job of working with students and with advocates on this important legislation. House Bill 430 by Ted James is a product of the Police Training, Screening, and De-escalation Task Force and is designed to strengthen public trust in law enforcement by refining systems of accountability in response to officer misconduct. House Bill 446 by Rhonda Butler creates the Office of the State Americans with Disabilities Coordinator within the Division of Administration, and this office will work to align resources and identify needs for Louisianans with disabilities. Senate Bill 10 by Cleo Fields makes kindergarten mandatory beginning at age 5. Senate Bill 27 by Franklin Foyle enhances and refines the military-friendly campus designation to improve opportunities for Louisiana military and military veterans. Senate Bill 105 by Gerald Boudreaux mandates the construction and placement of a statue to commemorate the contributions of African American veterans of the United States Armed Forces right next door to the Capitol in the Louisiana Veterans Memorial Park. Senate Bill 151 by Regina Barrow outlines specific rights afforded to foster youth, including rights to privacy, a safe and supportive environment, access to ongoing care information, and access to support and various other resources. Senate Bill 170 by Ronnie Johns creates the Office of Human Trafficking Prevention within the Office of the Governor. And Senate Bill 215 by Regina Barrow provides for reasonable workplace accommodations for pregnant and postpartum workers. Also this morning in this room, I was able to join legislators and advocates to sign 12 bills related to further criminal justice reform. This is part of our ongoing bipartisan efforts to create a more just and equitable Louisiana through responsible criminal justice reform. I know you'll have questions about other specific bills, or at least I suspect you will. We're still in the process of receiving bills, many of which are the most important bills of the session, and the conference committee reports were actually adopted just minutes or hours before the session concluded. And we look forward to reviewing all of those bills. But I will tell you there's a lot of good legislation. And I'm happy to make that announcement, and I look forward to signing that good legislation. For example, the Promise Program, which establishes the state financial aid program for Louisiana residents who are 21 or older who enroll in a qualified program at a 2-year public post-secondary education institution or an accredited proprietary school to pursue an associate degree or a credential needed for a high-demand, high-range occupation. And of course, that's going to be named after Governor Foster. Sports betting, as you know, has been a hot topic for a number of sessions. And while I have signed one bill on this issue already, 2 more are headed to my desk, one of which dedicates a portion of the tax revenue to early childhood education. And as mentioned earlier today, the portion of the revenue generated by sports betting that will go to early childhood education was increased today in a conference committee report. As some of you may be surprised to hear, I'm interested in signing the bill that would lessen the penalty for possessing small amounts of marijuana. We are reviewing that one now. It came to us just recently. At my State of the State address on the opening day of the session, I said that despite all the challenges we faced over the past year, whether it was COVID, hurricanes, winter storms, most recently additional flooding, I am supremely confident that better days, brighter days are ahead. And in fact, I think we are starting to see those days now. 1.5 million Louisianans are fully vaccinated, and that number grows larger every day. And while we certainly still have a lot of work to do, life is starting to look normal again. And so, to a large degree, we got our sunshine back. I knew that we would. And on that note, I will take a few questions. Yes, sir.
Governor, lawmakers in your administration agreed to sort of an 11th hour deal on the unemployment benefits, in which the federal enhanced benefits will be ended by July 31st in exchange for permanently increasing states' a week is worth giving up the benefits early?
Well, if you were covering prior news conferences, you know that I'd already indicated that Secretary Dashwad, myself, and others had talked about discontinuing those benefits around the 1st of August because September 6th was the date selected by Congress in the bill that authorized the enhancements that will expire on September the 6th. And the reason it was expired is that happens to be Labor Day, and the country is back in school by Labor Day. As you know, the vast majority of schools take in Louisiana in August. And so keeping the spirit of that, we could actually move that date up. I'm still waiting on a report from Dr. Richardson, the economist, to indicate the degree to which Louisiana benefits from continued use of these enhanced unemployment benefits and what the cost might be in terms of employers not having the employees that they might want to have. But in any event, we had always looked at the 1st of August, and so the 31st of July is not a bad compromise. Yes?
You said you haven't had a chance to review bills, but do you have an opinion on the bill to move the motor vehicle sales tax from the general fund to?
Yeah, well, we're looking at it because that bill came together just minutes before it was voted on, and I think you know they swapped out one conference committee report from another, and we're going to look at it. We obviously share the goal of increasing our investment in transportation. It's something that we've been committed to all along. You will remember that we created a task force to study and make recommendations on the types of infrastructure we should invest in, how much investment we should make, and how that revenue should be derived. As a result of that, I, in 2017, supported a gas tax increase. You all asked me in here last week whether I could support any portion of the 0.45 being kept on the books in order to pay for transportation. I said yes. So I've always looked for ways to do this. The strange part of this is, and what bears careful attention, is that when the legislature realized they couldn't get the support among the members to pay for infrastructure investments, they decided to do it without paying for it. And it would come out of the general fund. So my biggest concern is what I said earlier. We know that the stimulative effect of all of the billions of dollars of federal origin that have turned over in our economy have produced a bubble, much like the post-Katrina bubble that happened. And if you make long-term decisions thinking that bubble is going to last forever, you're making a serious mistake because it surely won't. So we have to take a careful look at the language that they used in terms of figuring out what the trigger would be to reduce the amount that actually comes out of the general fund and goes into the sub-fund at the Transportation Trust Fund, and how that would work and so forth. But I want to remind everyone that in 2025, the 0.45 sales tax increase that goes to the general fund goes away. That's $500 million by itself. What I heard today on the floor of the House was up to $300 million additional would also be moved out of general fund. So that's $800 million in that year alone, and that's just on the revenue side. That's not looking at the expenditure side, and we know we're going to have to deal with the loss of the FMAP enhancement. We don't know exactly what that looks like because Congress hasn't told us yet, but we know the enhancement only goes through the end of this calendar year. So there's a lot to be taken into consideration. And, you know, I am gratified that they moved the effective date as to when all this would happen into the future, because I think that's an indication that they, too, don't know what the future holds. And so hopefully we'll be able to work together and achieve what is a common goal. But I'm not yet ready to tell you whether this particular bill is one that we can sign. And I would remind you that there's a couple of other things that have to happen before we can know more. One is, will the tax reform pass this fall? And because if it does, then we have a more stable tax structure, and we don't let Congress decide for us what our revenue will be on the income tax. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking that I skipped over that part of my prepared remarks. But, you know, we've always supported tax reform since the task force was created way back in my first term and made that first report. And the general idea is to broaden the base and lower the rates. And you do that by exchanging deductions and exemptions and so forth for lower rates. So you know that I support doing that with respect to the FIT elimination, which the voters are going to decide whether they want to support that in exchange for lower individual income tax rates and corporate tax rates, and for the first time ever, a phase out of the corporate franchise tax, which is in that legislation. Of course, certain revenue benchmarks would have to be met in order for that to happen, but this is the first time we've set up on the course to phasing out the franchise tax. Those are all good things, and of course we wanted them to be revenue neutral. There's a slight cost to them, not much in the grand scheme of things, but all of that's important. But we have to know whether the voters are going to vote on that to know what the impact is on our revenue collections going forward. And the other thing that we don't know yet is the federal infrastructure package, whether it passes, what it will entail, and what non-federal match is going to be required in order to draw down the federal dollars. So there's a lot of question marks out there, in addition to what the language actually says in the bill that was just released a couple of hours ago. As I look at the clock, I think that's about right. So I'm not prepared yet to say whether we can support it, but what I can tell you is that we're going to continue to work with the legislature to find a long-term viable solution to transportation infrastructure investments that don't jeopardize our ability to fund critical investments in education, whether it's K through 12, higher ed, early childhood, health care, the Department of Children and Family Services, our prisons, or anything else that's essential. We just went through all of that. And if anything, I think we should make sure that we remember the lessons that we learned in my first term. Tyler?
In answering Will's question, you digressed into tax, and I think you were saying that you are going to support the tax swap bills, but you didn't specifically say that.
Well, I think you saw some conference committee reports that came out today that made some changes in the rates from what was actually passed initially on both the House and the Senate floors. And so we're taking a look at those. And of course, I'll be working with Kimberly Lewis, who's the Secretary of Revenue, to make sure that they do what we intend for them to do and what the legislature intended for them to do. I'm not trying to be coy here. I expect to support those bills. But the changes were made today, and it would be irresponsible for me to come here and say that I know for a fact I'm going to sign those bills before we have an opportunity to take a deep dive and make sure they do what they're supposed to do. The previous iteration was one that we had vetted enough that had changes not been made, I could make the commitment. I just can't make the commitment today, but so long as they do the things that I just talked about, if they lower our tax rates in exchange for giving up exemptions and deductions and so forth, principally the FIT, and do that in a revenue neutral way so that our tax code and the administration is simpler, I have no problem signing it. We just got to make sure that that a mistake wasn't made. Yes, ma'am?
There are at least 3 bills that got final passage that involve putting restrictions on the ability to have COVID-19 vaccine mandates and limiting what can be done around such a mandate, basically saying colleges couldn't have those mandates, state buildings couldn't have those mandates. Do you support those kinds of bills?
Yeah, and I haven't read the bills as they came out, but I will tell you they'll have a high bar to get over in order to meet with my approval. We have to make sure that we're adequately protecting public safety and that the things we do in Louisiana reflect the best science and medicine available. And, you know, that's what we're going to do. And I can't respond to any specific bill just yet. And some of them are couched in terms of whether the vaccine is administered pursuant to an EUA as opposed to the licensure or the full authorization. And so I have to look at all of that, take that into consideration. But as you know, I've had differences of opinion with the legislature in the past about what the responsible role of government is in a pandemic. And it's certainly possible that we might have differences of opinion as it relates to these bills as well. Yes, ma'am.
Representative Hughes has a bill that would open up the number of people who could sue over child abuse. And lawmakers told me that both the Boy Scouts and the Catholic Church, they had heard, were opposed to the bill. So I wanted to know if either of those institutions have reached out to talk to you about it, and also how you feel about the bill.
Well, we'll take a look at the final version of the bill. The answer, the first part of your question is no. Neither the Boy Scouts nor, well, I actually had one conversation with the Archbishop in New Orleans, and he indicated to me at that time that the bill was one that he could support. Now that was several weeks ago, and I don't know what the version of the bill was when he spoke to me, and so I don't intend to speak for him, and I don't want anybody thinking that whatever the bill looks like today is one that he told me was okay with them. But that was the only conversation that I had. I never had a conversation with any group expressing any concern or opposition to the bill. Yes, sir.
I just want to clarify on the unemployment. So you were already considering an August 1st rollback date prior to this deal. And then in the past, you've mentioned that one of the reasons why unemployment here is still so high is because service industry, tourism hasn't come back. So what do you think the state of tourism will look like in August when you potentially roll these benefits back?
Well, obviously, we're doing everything we can to grow our economy as fast as we can every single day. What we know is that when kids go back to school, parents have more of an opportunity to go back to work without having to worry about child care. And that really was always the reason for picking August as opposed to September. And so we've been looking at an August cutoff with respect to the enhanced benefits for some time now. But we wanted to make sure that if an earlier cutoff was warranted clearly by the economics of the situation, that we would know that as well. So we've actually commissioned a study by Dr. Jim Richardson. As I mentioned, I don't yet have it. I expect to get it in another week, 10 days or so, something like that, and we'll take a look at it. I can't sit here today and tell you exactly what tourism is going to look like on the 1st of August. But what I can tell you is that the jobs are coming back in Louisiana pretty quickly at a good pace. On the tourism jobs are my biggest concern, because until tourism is back, many of those jobs are not going to be fully back. And so that's one of the reasons why we haven't been one of the first 20 or 21 states to do this, is because I knew that in Louisiana we would need a little more time to transition if we were going to do it responsibly. And so it's just trying to strike a reasonable balance between the continued receipt of the funds on the one hand and administration of the additional benefits, and then actually making sure that we have employees at places of business. And, you know, reasonable people can disagree about exactly what that looks like, but I can tell you my conversations with many people who represent workers, including the AFL-CIO and others, really were very concerned about getting an additional $28 a week in the minimum benefit going forward that'll start in January, because for a long time now, Louisiana has had the smallest weekly benefit in the country. And we just need to do better than that. And this is one way towards advancing that goal as well. So everything's a trade-off. Reasonable people can disagree about exactly where you draw the line. But that's why we actually were looking at August 1st over the last couple of months, to be honest. Yes.
You mentioned that obviously the package of tax bills slightly lowers revenue over a multiple year period, and there are also separate tax break measures that were passed that were sponsored by Democratic legislators. Are you concerned that any of that will run afoul of the federal guidance on the federal pandemic aid that
Yeah.
we're getting?
No, because generally speaking, they are very minor adjustments to the total revenue that we will collect. And when we received additional guidance from Treasury as to how we look at the baseline year and figure out what the tax situation has to be before we run afoul of that provision in the American Rescue Plan, we're just not going to come close to that. We're very, very confident of that. And look, you can't re-engineer your income tax rates, and so whether it's corporate or individual, that bring in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and get it exactly to zero. But we did as close, the best that we could, and they're slightly revenue negative, but that's an estimate. And quite frankly, we don't know exactly. We can't say with precision, but we have to work with the estimates that we're given by the fiscal office, and they're checked by the Department of Revenue. We believe we're going to be very close on that. And then the additional dollars that are at stake, I think, are, for the relevant period at least, are less than $20 million on the tax credits and things that you were just mentioning, whether it's the youth employment or the apprenticeship jobs tax credit, and the 5-year, the additional 5 years with the increase in the earned income tax credit. None of that comes into play during the relevant period of the American Rescue Plan anyway. And obviously, because that level of earned income tax credit is already in place, it does not effectuate a reduction from current revenue regardless. Look, I want to thank y'all for coming out tonight and covering this, and I want to finish where I started. I'm gratified to be able to say that we are stabilizing our state. We're resuming the robust growth that we had in Louisiana pre-pandemic. I think we're coming back relatively quickly and strong, and that's going to continue for a while. And this budget that we've adopted, the bills that have come out of this session for the most part, will allow us to continue to do that. And so I do encourage people to make sure that they're doing their part to make sure that we come out of this pandemic. And again, you do that, if you haven't already, by being vaccinated. And if you haven't been vaccinated yet and you've got questions, I encourage you to go to your physician and ask those questions. It is a choice. It's obviously a choice. This isn't mandatory. But we're asking you to make a wise decision that is informed by good information. And if you will do that, and if more people will become vaccinated, we're going to actually have more normalcy, and we know that the sooner our economy will come all the way back. But I want to also thank these folks up here today for working so hard, and all the legislators, and again, the Speaker and the President. Certainly not agreement on all fronts. And we'll be making additional decisions over the coming weeks with respect to bills that are signed or bills that are vetoed, and you all are going to get information to that as it happens. But all in all, a very good effort, and I appreciate the work that was put in by the legislature. And I want to encourage the people of Louisiana to understand that we are in a much, much better place than we were a year ago, and I have every expectation that a year from now, we're going to be in a much, much better place than we are tonight. So thank you all very much, and God bless. Thank you, Sam.